Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to the second channel Geography video. This is everyone's favorite series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today I wanted to talk about part of the world which really gets people confused because the British Isles is something that most foreigners vaguely understand. You know, you got Ireland and you got Irish culture, which is widely exported, and the Irish people. You got Scotland and Scottish culture, the Scottish people, etc. You got England, English people, and all the England things which everyone knows about. But the truth is there is another country. If we exclude the whole Northern Ireland thing, which we'll just do for now, just to keep things simple. But the truth is Wales is one of the least understood parts of the UK. You know, Wales and Welsh people and the Welsh language are something that really make most people go question mark, question mark, question mark. So if we can do today's video, why not help you understand a little bit more about Wales, where it is, what it is, what's going on with it, because it is officially a country as our first of these country-focused videos. So hopefully you all do enjoy it. By the way, before we get started, here is Wales. That's Wales. That's where Wales is, that's where Welsh people live, and now you know. But yeah, let's get straight into it. Hopefully you enjoy the video. Let's get started by talking about how you can divide this country even more, because the truth is it is a country. A lot of people say like, so how is it a country then if the UK is the official country? And although I kind of subscribe to this because most people use country to mean sovereign state, the Wales is one of the countries within the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is the sovereign state. It goes to the UN, it makes all the diplomatic agreements, and the army is in the UK, the currency is the UK. However, Wales is a country within that wider country or sovereign state. So that's where the confusion is. Most people use country to mean sovereign state, and it gets way more confusing with the UK, where even people that live here say like, oh yeah, but they have to be countries, because the truth is most things that define countries are not quite true with the UK, but kind of are in other ways. So for instance, again, even though we have one currency, one military, one UN vote, etc., we make all international relations together, there's the confusion of the fact that, well, Wales has its own Welsh government. The Welsh government sits in the Welsh capital of Cardiff, so Wales has a Welsh capital, Cardiff, with a Welsh government, with a Welsh people which vote for that Welsh government, and some of those Welsh people even speak Welsh. But again, the level of confusion here then goes up another level where you're like, oh yeah, and then Wales has its own sports team for pretty much every sport. So they have their own World Cup team. It doesn't do very well, but they do have their own team for most international sports. But then it gets even more confusing because then they go back into the UK's Great Britain team for the Olympics. It's confusing stuff, and the reason for it is because basically each of the countries in the UK, dividing a country into countries is not something that's done very often, and it means that there's no real proper definitions, especially because certain countries are more countries than other ones. Because for instance, if you think about Scotland was its own independent kingdom until only about 400 years ago, when they had to combine with the UK to make this kingdom combined. Whereas Wales, even though it was its own separate country for a little bit, it was the Principality of Wales about 800 years ago. It was never really distinct from England, and even to this day, for the longest time, a lot of laws were just written to mean England and Wales. Any law that was written to apply to England applied to Wales just by default, because even though Wales was its own separate principality for that 300-year stretch, it was, again, one, a principality, two, it was always controlled by England, and even before it was controlled by England, it swore allegiance to England, and because of that, it's kind of like, yeah, it's a country, and it has a distinct regional thing now, but it's the most similar to England of all the other countries, and that's why England and Wales kind of get mixed up, and that's why England just kind of envelops Wales in a lot of different ways. Now you understand that's why the Wales and Welsh culture thing doesn't go quite as wide, but what is going on with Wales? What do you need to know about this place? Well, there's a lot of famous things in Wales that you should probably know about. They have the tallest mountains in the UK, excluding the Highlands, Snowdonia. They're quite a famous set of mountains on YouTube, I believe. They have Cardiff, which is where if you watch a bunch of British TV shows, a lot of them are filmed here, including Doctor Who, Sherlock, Torchwood. Torchwood in particular, you see a lot of scenes very, easily known as being in Cardiff. But even TV shows that aren't set in Cardiff are filmed here quite often because BBC has a headquarters in Cardiff for all of Wales, as well as there's a lot of other TV channels which have their bases here in Cardiff. Because even though it's the most populous city in Wales, it's not that populous and not that expensive compared to the rest of the UK. Because the other thing about Wales, which means it kind of gets diminished in relation to the rest of the UK, is the fact that they have just 3 million people living here compared to the 60+ million of the rest of the UK combined. And as well as being a fairly small part of the UK geographically, they're also small populationally, and that's kind of why you see the big imbalance there. So yeah, now you understand that. Let's talk about Wales and how you can divide it even more. We know it's a country, and the thing about countries is you can always divide them more because there's always going to be differences between a place that includes this much area and this many people. Even though it's only 3 million people, there's still quite a big division which you can widely put down to North-South Wales, because north of Wales is less populated, it's more rural. That's why Snowdonia's here. here. It's more rural, it has more Welsh speakers, and the south of Wales is where you find most of the modern day industry. You find the tourism, you find like the public services, you find the stuff which has survived the big kind of big problem that Wales went through, because you got to bear in mind, even though Wales was fairly prosperous until somewhat recently, the big crash of like that affected the north of like natural resources, mining coal and making steel, all of this sort of stuff affected Wales especially bad, and now their country to this day is the least productive in terms of like value per head of the entirety of the UK. Each other country in the UK is much more productive and more in terms of money, that is, than the rest of it, which is something you might not have known. So yeah, the south is the part that better survived, the north is the part that didn't survive quite so well, and therefore is more rural, and also speaks a lot more Welsh, because I mentioned Welsh earlier. Here is where Welsh is spoken within Wales. You might think, whoa, that's a lot of Welsh. That part speaks 80 to 100% of them speak Welsh, but the thing is even though Wales has their own language of Welsh, it's spoken by about 1 in 6 people that live in Wales, so it's not a giant people that even speak it, and plus, and on top of that, English is the working language. So if you want to come here, if you watch this video and you're like, yeah, Wales is cool, I want to go check out Wales, you gotta bear in mind that even though, they have their own language of Welsh, you don't essentially need to learn it to speak to people, because everyone speaks English, albeit with a slightly interesting accent, I should say, because the UK, the British Isles have some pretty diverse accents, but you gotta bear in mind is that even though there is a Welsh language, and it's very widely spoken, especially in the north, even though they have that, they'll still speak English here quite a bit. So you'll notice when you look at the map here, you can see the parts furthest away from England are the ones which speak the most Welsh. Again, that kind of makes sense, right? Like, the more England is closer, the more English kind of spreads its influence. But there's also a very interesting distinction where, even though it's mostly, like, English close to the border, the big south part of Wales, the most productive bit, also speaks English, so that's why it looks like there's way more Welsh than it is. And also, there's this interesting, thing over here, which is the, it's basically the little enclave of England within Wales. So, it was actually, like, called, like, it's like, called England, Little England Beyond Wales, I believe it's called. It's like a little part of England existing in Wales. It's confusing, but that's a thing that does exist there. And basically this part of the country right here, even though it's within Wales and it's officially Welsh and the people there are kind of Welsh, they were always very much more aligned to England, and like again, it's fascinating that it works this way, but they were very much more aligned to England, and therefore this part right here, as you can see, this little bit right here, including Tenby, which was a very well-known port, all these places were actually kind of English, even though they existed in Wales, which is, again, it's one of those fascinating, like, ooh, country in a country things that you might not have known. So boom, now we know about Wales, we know how to subdivide it between north and south, we know the reason for that is because of like industry and stuff, but how can you divide it even more? Because like with England, there's the whole county, but they're not shown on the map system, and yeah, if you look down, you can't actually see the distinction between any counties of Wales, because even though they exist, there's kind of lots of ways you could subdivide Wales, so instead, Google just says like, that's all Wales, that's a subdivision of the UK, that's good enough for us. And yeah, in case you are curious as to how you could divide it, well, there's two ways. There's the historical counties, which look like this. Again, they're much more evenly divided geographically, as you can see. Like, it just about makes sense. And then you've got the modern-day counties, the administrative divisions of Wales, which, as you can see, the north is much more, because it's much more, less populous per place. A lot of the counties have been kind of combined and, like, merged and stuff like that. And then the south is much more split up because they need to be administered slightly differently. So, boom, as you can see, big difference, because Wales was much more spread out before. Now it's not so spread out so much. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention. In the north-south divide thing, even though it is kind of like the north and south, there's also kind of this middle coast in between, or not middle coast, but there's also this middle in between where most of the population do not live. There are some people that live there. There's some small towns like of like 5,000 people, but most people do not live in between here and there. Most people live on either the north coast or the south coast, which is why the north-south divide is particularly strong here. I have a Welsh friend. I was going to say like a girlfriend, but I mean like a friend who is a girl who was like really fiercely against North Welsh people because she came from, I think it was like Carmarthen or something. So yeah, there you go. Now you know. Now you understand the whole idea of like, for some reason there's a rivalry, but it's mostly friendly, like with the England, like north-south thing. And yeah, there you go. There's a north-south Welsh divide, and it mostly goes from coast to coast, with the big middle area being like, who even really lives there? Also, just because this is useful for tourism purposes, there are two giant rail lines running through Wales, which come from England. One goes along the south and the most populous areas, and one goes along the north. And although you might think like the south one's the one you want to take, you could go along the north because there are two really important things up here. So first of all, well, I mean, there's more, but there's two things we're going to be talking about. The first one is Holyhead. This is the closest port to Ireland and Dublin. So if you want to go to Ireland via England without taking a plane, because that's the thing you might want to do, I've done this before. You can take a journey on the ferry. It's quite pleasant. It's a nice ferry. It's a fun journey, and you can get there in something like 2 hours. So that's a fast journey because it's very, very close. And also, there's the longest town name in the entirety of the UK, and I believe the entirety of Europe. It used to be all of the world, but there's a place in New Zealand now which is longer. It's the town of Llanfair I'm not even able to pronounce it. It's a Welsh town name, Llanfair, again, you can't pronounce it when you see it. It's a place name which is 70-something letters long, and it looks like this when you see it on the train board. So you might be curious as to how there could possibly be a place in Wales with that many characters, and the simple answer to that question, let me just quickly move this. The simple answer to that question is the fact that they don't really. So even though it's called Llanfair, even though you might say like Toy Cat, why don't you pronounce that? Because it's a tourist stunt basically. So back in Victorian times when the railway just came to this town, it started spreading all over the UK, and they spread to this town as well. They wanted something to make them distinct, so they named their town train station the name of their town, which is Llanfair Pool, which looks like that. But they also then they added the name of the region it's in, which is where they got like 30 of those characters, the name of a church, and there's just a bunch of names from the area into this big name. And because it's a Welsh name, everyone's like, wow, that's so weird and wacky. A lot of people did come here just for their long name, and it's one of those wacky things to me that a place is famous and people go to a place just because it has a long place name, even if that place name is fake. And that is Llanfair. It came up in a book I was writing, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool that it comes up here too. So boom, that's Wales. There's the north of Wales. There's a lot of other things going on up here, but not quite as much as going on in the south. And now you know the big divisions of Wales, and you know what's going on in the country. You know what's Welsh and stuff. So before we go though, I do want to just also mention just a few things that I thought was a little bit interesting. So besides the fact that they have the Snowdonia Mountains, besides the fact that they have most BBC shows being filmed here, they also have the fascinating fact of the border with England, because Wales only borders one country. If you consider them to be their own country, they have one border, which is the border between England and Wales. And the border between England and Wales is quite bizarre because, like, even though it's on a map, it kind of has loads of gaps in it. And this is only on Google Maps. OpenStreetMapper does not have the same issue. It kind of draws them straight. But on Google Maps, at least, there's no officially defined border between England and Wales. Like, it kind of has, like I said, it has gaps up here, and there's a giant gap below the south of this point right here, where they draw the border right up to the Big Square Bridge, I should say, and then it kind of just stops. So that's England, that's Wales, and then after that, they kind of just guess. Like, there are places that call themselves England, there are places that call themselves Wales, but because, it's not officially marked in any way, and it's not, I guess, wasn't officially decided, then it means that there's kind of this weird ambiguity when you get too close to one side or the other, and there's even an army base in this little part right here that says it's near England and near Wales, and basically, there's the weird ambiguity of the English-Welsh border, and the fun thing about this border is because it's internal sovereign state borders, not internal country borders, but it's a border between two countries within one state. Basically, it doesn't matter. They're not going to go to war over it. They're not going to, like, have big fights over it. And it means that there's kind of this big ambiguous place, which is arguably a part of England, arguably a part of Wales. Again, it's never actually going to come up that way. It'll always be in one or the other. But it's fun to me that there's this ambiguity, and that's something you might not have known about the English-Welsh border. It kind of just stops as to where it is, and a thing you might not have known. So before we, wrap up today's video, if there's one more thing you should know about Wales, or two more things in one thing, it's the fact that they have a dragon on their flag. You might think, like, why is that important, Toy Cat? Well, when you look at the rest of the UK's flags, you get like, oh, we have a cross and we have a whatever. When you look at the Welsh flag, though, you get way more excited because this is what their flag looks like. That's right, their flag is a dragon, and I know, it's a bit more exciting because they have, like, 3 colours. It's like, it's cool stuff, basically. And in case you're curious, their name in Welsh is cymru, or I can't pronounce it in Welsh. But basically, they have their own flag, and it's the coolest of the flags because it has a dragon. But it means if you're from Wales and you want to draw on your own flag, you're going to do it terribly. And if you look up Welsh flag, you can see a bunch of terrible Welsh flags. But we won't do that today. Instead, I'll wrap up today's video by saying this is a country that exists as part of another country, but it is its own country, and it exists with a lot of the own definitions of country, and it kind of just stretches the point of, like, the only thing that makes something a country is when everyone agrees to call it a country, and Wales is the biggest example of, like, well, it's that, and it's not that, and you can't really make a clear point on one way or the other, and it's a fun example of, like, we don't really know, the words that we're saying only mean things because we say they mean something, and if we say they mean conflicting things, it can still be kind of true, and that's why Wales is both a country, but exists as part of another country. So now you know, hopefully you'll enjoy this video. I had fun making it, because I want to make more videos on, like, countries, like, just individual countries, talk about them a little bit, and let me know in the comments if you want to see that. But for now, second channel, don't care. Goodbye.